Today I'll be tying a green drake sparkle dun. This is a size 10. I tie them up to size 8 and down to size 14s. This is one of my favorite flies to imitate a green drake on my local river. I'll start with the Daiichi 1280 size 10 hook. I've already crimped the barb. Put it in my vise. The thread I'm using today is some Danville 70 denier. It's an olive thread. I really like it for these flies. Start right behind the eye of the hook, and I'll go down with touching turns a little bit past the halfway point and then back to about 1/3. I've created another YouTube video that I'll link to below of just tying sparkle duns. And in that particular one, I use about the 1/4 mark. It's a little bit forward, but in this case, with the green drakes, they're a chubby body, and I like to have a little bit longer head for them. So I'll position it there. I've got some compare dun or sparkle dun deer hair that I'll select. And I'll get quite a bit. And the challenge on these larger flies is having too much hair versus being able to put it on the hook without it spinning. And I'll show you the technique I use. The first thing I do, I'll grab the tips and I'll try to pull all the fuzz out. You can just use your finger, and a lot of times that will pop out. And now we'll put them tips first into a hair stacker. Pull it out horizontal, the direction that you want the wing to extend. So I want it to go over the front of the hook, and I'll pull it out this direction. Now, most deer hair has a little bit of a wave to it, and you'll see that this is extending downward. And so I'm going to flip it over as I pull it out. So that the curvature will go up this direction. And when I bring it upright, it'll automatically go back just a little bit. Let me align, make sure my tips are aligned. Pull a couple out on the bottom. Flatten my thread, and I'm going to hold the deer hair on my side of the hook and just cant it a little bit towards me. As I take 2 soft wraps and pull, then it will go on top, rotate on top of the hook, and I'll start wrapping it. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. You can tell I'm a counter. And while still holding on to the butt ends, I'll come in here and start to trim those fibers out. I'll flatten my thread again and just move these forward. I'm not going to do anything yet, but I'll hold these and start to take some wraps through the butt ends, and that will help secure the deer hair on top. Now I'll go through and sweep from the bottom up, and you'll note that most of those fibers are on top. You'll always have a couple, especially on these larger sparkle duns, you'll have a few fibers that don't want to get with the program, and you'll constantly try to remove them as you move forward. So there will be a few more butt ends here that you can trim out. And one trick is just to take your scissors and come through here, and that will eliminate most of the good deer hair that you want to save. The tail of these, I'm using a crinkled Zelon. It's a mayfly brown. I get those from West Yellowstone. And you'll notice that the crinkled Zelon looks like this. And I like it a little bit straighter. So what I do is just take a hackle plier and I let it hang, and gravity will straighten it out to some extent. And I have those on the side. And here's one that I've just been letting gravity take over, and you'll notice that a lot of that crinkle is now taken out. I twist the ends a little bit to get them square. I'll trim off so they're pretty flat, even, and take a few wraps. And what I'm doing is, as I've come through and trimmed the butt ends of the deer hair, I've created a taper here. And as I apply my tail, I'm filling in that taper to some extent. Now I'll come back and place a wrap just behind where I tied it in. And I'm going to take a few wraps between here. I'll pull back and just rotate, or just rotate it through and wiggle it through, I guess is a better word. And that's 2 wraps, so I've taken about half of it. I'm going to come back and take another third and wrap, and you can see those fibers flare a little bit. And the 4th wrap, I'll take right at so this is a good example of that deer hair going around the hooks to some extent. So I'll take a few wraps right at the base of the wing. And you'll notice that for most of it, it's sticking straight up. So I'll take my thread and go behind with some soft wraps, and now I'll use touching turns and tie down the tail. I'm holding it up a little bit, and I'll come right back to the barb of the hook. I don't want to pull these tight when I'm trimming the tail because it will bounce back. So I just release the pressure, and I want it about the length of the hook, and I'll trim it. For my rib, I'm using a DMC embroidery floss, or yarn, or I guess it's a floss. It's number 938. I don't think that that's critical, but I've used a brown because that's what the coloration of the green drakes that I have. You could use a yellow if you have more yellow cast on the green drakes in your area. And it comes multi-stranded, and what I do is just open these up, and I'll just pull one of the fibers out and then use that for the rib. I'll make a soft wrap and tie in the butt ends and hold that out of the way. Now you've got 2 choices. I'm going to dub a body, and what I found on these larger flies is that you could certainly use dubbing and just create a body, but what I'm going to do, what I found on size 8s, 10s, and sometimes 12s, I use a material that's called Uni-Stretch, and this happens to be olive. And I'm just going to use that to build up the base of my body. And you'll notice I'm just using touching turns coming back. I'll trim the butt end there, and I'll continue to go back to the barb. And then as I move forward, I'm using touching turns, and I'll just start creating a little bit of bulk on the body. And each time I take a turn, it's making a wrap of this material. And so it'll start cording to some extent. And now I'll open up my wraps. And just trying to create some bulk. I'm not going quite as far down, so I can create that taper. And you can make multiple passes depending upon how much dubbing that you want to apply. I'll go one more time through here. Flatten it to some extent. I don't think that that's critical by any means because you're going to cover it with dubbing anyway. And I'll come right up to the point behind the deer hair. Now I'll reapply my thread. Trim the thread. Make sure that I've gone over that unit stretch. Trim it. And now we're going to apply some superfine dubbing. I use two colors for my green drakes. I like this caddis green, which is all used today. I find that when the green drakes hatch, they're a brighter color, and then they'll fade very quickly into this gray olive. So this is caddis green and gray olive, and those are the two that I usually use. Now when I'm going to use a technique for these larger flies, I'm going to pull out, if I can get it positioned in front of the camera here, you can see that this is a large, or quite a bit of dubbing. I'll start with that. Use a little moisture, and I'm going to rotate my fingers one direction around the thread, and I'll let the rest of this hang. I'll just put a little bit, do the same right at the end here, so it's not going to fly away. And you can see that I can slide it back and forth on the thread. So I'm going to make a couple of wraps to anchor, and now I can pull this back, the rest of the dubbing, and I'll just start to, again, rotate, squeeze, and press and make it rotate around the thread. I'm using a clockwise turn, and I'll start making wraps backwards. And you'll notice that this will start to open up, and so you can just take the base of it, and as I squeeze right at the end of my dubbing, clear back here, I can rotate that, and it will tighten up this whole dubbing. So I'll hold right at the end and then start moving forward. And I'm using touching turns to create a thick, chunky body. And that, you notice that that opens up again. So you can continue to squeeze that. You can pull the fibers somewhat. Then I'll pull the wings back and make a few wraps forward. The usual technique I use for dubbing is just to take a little bit of dubbing at a time and apply it to the thread like that. So you can see those are two different techniques that you can use. The first technique is great when you have large flies and you want to apply a lot of dubbing at one time. So remember, anchor it and then twist it, and it will create a nice dubbing noodle. Now you'll notice that I'm trying to create a taper in the front. My dubbing is loosened up there, so I want that tighter. And I'm going to apply that in the front and then right behind the deer hair. You notice how I move the dubbing to make that deer hair squeeze forward. So I'm trying to get Let me get my hand out of the way. I'll demonstrate that with my scissors. So the deer hair is here, and as I apply the dubbing around both sides, it will actually make the deer hair go tighter together to create this nice wing. Put a little bit more dubbing in here. I've got a slot behind the deer hair. These size 8s and 10s take a lot of dubbing, that's for sure. Creating that taper, using the thread to move the deer hair right at the base, and then I'll wrap forward right behind the eye. Now I'll take my embroidery material and start to create my rib. So as I come up, I place my finger there just to move it out of the deer hair way. And I'm just creating a nice taper as I move forward. Evenly spaced, maybe opened up a little bit. And then right at the base, I like to apply one wrap right behind, come underneath, pull the fibers back, and apply one wrap immediately in front of the wing. And that's another technique to make that deer hair come up and squeeze it together using my scissors, make a nice wing. So I'll make tighter wraps in here. The heads of the green drake are kind of dark. And I'll finish this off with 3 wraps here, and then wrap back on the ribbing material, trim it. And with those wraps, I've ended up with a nice tapered head. Flatten my thread. And what I've been doing as of late is just to apply some head cement on the thread. You could certainly do that after you finish your whip finish. I'm starting at the back. I see I got a piece of deer hair in there, so we'll remove that. Make sure that's tight, and then just come in here with my scissors and pull the thread. And there you have a nice green drake sparkle done. One of my favorites. So I'll leave a link to my fly pattern sheet below. Again, this is a sparkle done, and you can make a sparkle done to imitate any mayfly. And I'll remind you that I have other YouTube videos of a sparkle done, a smaller sparkle done that I wouldn't use ribbing for. So if you like this, please hit the like button below and subscribe to my channel. And I'll leave the link below to the fly pattern sheet.